This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
India suffers its deadliest day yet in the coronavirus pandemic, with more than 3,600 deaths. Africa CDC warns the continent against large gatherings to avoid a dangerous spike in coronavirus infections. And U.S. President Joe Biden lays out his priorities as he marks 100 days in office. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Uche Koronko joins me now with your business highlights.
Thank you, Lindy. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. The World Bank grants $100 million for emergency recovery in northern Mozambique. And the value of transactions through mobile wallets in Egypt tripled in 2020. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. Well, we start the hour with some grim news coming out of India. The country has suffered its deadliest day yet in the coronavirus pandemic. More than 3,600 deaths were announced on Thursday, a spike no country has seen before. India also saw nearly 380,000 new cases. As panic sets in across the country, experts say authorities need to quickly ramp up the national vaccination campaign. About 9% of the population has received at least one vaccination dose, with health workers and the elderly being prioritized. The country has now seen more than 18 million coronavirus cases in total. Lindy Mtongana has more from Delhi.
Well, international aid has started pouring in from various parts of the world. The government has stated that more than 40 countries are actually sending in donation in the form of oxygen concentrators, ventilators, liquid oxygen, even medicines are arriving, which will then be distributed to different states. And the whole, operation will be taken care of by a task force which has been formed, which is an inter-ministerial team. And all these ministries will be coordinating with the states, and then these equipments will be sent to the state which requires it the most, knowing that Delhi is facing a massive shortage of oxygen, because of which we are seeing a number of people lose their lives. Delhi will also be taking claim in terms of getting more oxygen plants which are coming in from different parts of the world. So all that is happening on the one hand, and on the other hand, the vaccination program, the fourth phase has taken off. More than 10 million people have registered for the fourth phase, which means people who are above the age of 18 will get vaccinated from 1st of May. But interestingly, none of these people have got an appointment while they were registering, which was not the case earlier. That means they have not been given a specific date for the jab, and that clearly shows that there is shortage of vaccination. And apart from that, we've also seen a lot of information that is coming from the ground, that people who have gone for second dose have not received it because the vaccination centers have a display board saying no vaccine doses are available. So there is a massive shortage of vaccination as well, for which India is coordinating with other countries and trying to get some vaccinations also as a part of vaccine doses as a part of the donation. But all this is only showing one thing, that the country was not prepared for the second wave, and on the other hand, the systems have really crushed, and now it will take a bit of a time before things can be streamlined, or maybe more lives will be lost in the process.
Well, against the backdrop of India's COVID surge, the head of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is appealing to African nations to avoid mass gatherings in order to curb the spread of the coronavirus. Authorities are advising that all political and religious meetings, as well as parties, should be banned. The number of COVID-19 cases in Africa has now risen to over 4.5 million. This is a representation of 3.1% of the total global infections. There has also been over 100,000 recorded deaths. To date, nearly 18 million vaccines have been administered. Nations that have rolled out the most jabs include Morocco, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Ghana and Kenya. The Africa CDC says it is deeply worried about the COVID-19 surge in India. Africa's vaccine supply heavily relies on India, whose Serum Institute is the source of the AstraZeneca vaccines that are distributed by the global COVAX project to get doses to low and middle income countries. Meanwhile, South Sudan's government says it won't use the 60,000 expired doses of COVID-19 vaccines donated by the African Union in partnership with South African telecoms giant MTN. The country's health ministry says the country's policies don't permit the use of medicines that expire in less than 3 months, let alone expired ones. CGTN's Patrick Oyet explains.
The health ministry says when the COVID-19 vaccines from the African Union arrived in the country, they were just 2 weeks from reaching their expiration date. The 60,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccines from the AU arrived in South Sudan in late March. Officials say the country's Drug and Food Authority blocked the use of the vaccines. That's because the policy of the authority is not to allow the use of any medicines that are set to expire in less than 3 months. However, the World Health Organization says it consulted with AstraZeneca and it is advising that the expired COVID-19 vaccines could still be used for a further 3 months.
We as a South Sudan, we have already taken the stand that we're not going to use them. And I think it's what we're negotiating with them. If they can take it and give it to anybody that they wanted to use, or the company can retrieve them. So this is what is going to happen. But we are going ahead with the 132,000 that is still Save Lives is up to July.
The country launched a vaccination campaign on April 6th using AstraZeneca jabs from the global COVAX facility, and that process is ongoing. The health ministry says it has so far vaccinated 4,000 healthcare workers and the elderly people in Juba. It plans to roll out the inoculation campaign across the country in the coming weeks. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Now in Zimbabwe, a private sector vaccination campaign was officially launched on Thursday. Businesses in the country will procure about 1 million COVID-19 vaccines to help accelerate a national rollout plan that aims to vaccinate 10 million citizens. Farai Makutuya reports.
When the COVID-19 pandemic hit Zimbabwe, businesses assisted the government to set up testing centers and upgrade health facilities to handle infections. As the national response shifts to mass vaccination, corporates are also chipping in. Businesses across sectors including mining, banking, tourism and agriculture have pooled funds to buy the vaccines which are procured through government structures.
So they said these are the vaccines that we require, this is the number of employees. We are also going to vaccinate their immediate families and then also double that number, so that at least it will then go into the government pool and it will also then go into the government initiative to then vaccinate the general population. I would hasten to say at the last check that we had, the number of vaccines, if you double the amount, we would then be looking at a minimum of 1 million vaccines.
Zimbabwe began administering COVID-19 vaccines in February, initially targeting frontline workers. The program has since been expanded to the general public, although there's been a slow response. Less than 400,000 people have received their full doses 2 months into the drive. A figure government hopes will go up as the private sector vaccinations help counter public skepticism.
The number of people being vaccinated throughout the country is increasing daily. However, we need to accelerate the vaccination program so that we can reach herd immunity faster. With government resources limited and stretched through the demands that this pandemic has put on it, a private sector initiative to meet the cost of more or some of the vaccines is very welcome.
Government plans to spend about $100 million to buy enough vaccines to inoculate 60% of the population, about 10 million citizens. Farai Makutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Well, let's turn to the U.S. now. President Joe Biden says he's not looking for conflict with China, but is adopting a foreign policy that defends American interests. In his first address to Congress since taking office, Mr. Biden also unveiled massive new spending packages and pushed Congress to pass legislation on issues such as gun reforms. Correspondent Jagruti Dave reports from Washington.
Madam Speaker, the President of the United States.
Cheers for Joe Biden from the chamber, albeit from a smaller and masked group of lawmakers. His message to Congress and to the nation was that America is on the move again, both domestically and on the international stage. It was a historic moment, with the country's first female vice president and Speaker Pelosi behind him. And top of his foreign policy agenda was competition with China and its president Xi Jinping, in areas such as technology and trade.
He's deadly earnest about becoming the most significant, consequential nation in the world.
But President Biden made it clear he didn't want conflict with China.
I also told President Xi that we'll maintain a strong military presence in the Indo-Pacific, just as we do for NATO and Europe, not to start a conflict, but to prevent one.
The US's hardening stance towards China is one of the few areas of bipartisan consensus in Congress. Domestically, Joe Biden has a fight on his hands to convince Republican lawmakers to back his new spending plan and support his calls for police and gun reforms.
My fellow Americans, we have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and to enact police reform in George Floyd's name that passed the House already. I know Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in very productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. We need to work together to find a consensus.
But with America still deeply divided, it's unclear whether Joe Biden will succeed in getting that consensus. Jagruti Dave, CGTN, Washington.
Beijing has responded to President Biden's speech, saying the two sides should not engage in dangerous competition.
It is normal for China and the United States to compete in some areas, but this kind of competition should not be a life and death duel. The two sides should improve themselves through competition, rather than engage in vicious competition and zero-sum games. In recent years, the United States has repeatedly undermined international rules and politicized economic, trade, technology, and other issues, and willfully suppressed the development of China and other countries. We hope that the U.S. will not hold a mentality of sour grapes towards China and will view China's development with a more peaceful and rational mindset.
Now, during the Trump administration, U.S. private sector involvement in Africa grew significantly. Initiatives such as Prosper Africa were developed to strengthen bilateral trade and investment with African nations, while institutions such as the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation directed funding towards Africa. Consequently, Africa is the second largest recipient of U.S. investment following Latin America. Now, with the current administration, the African continent is expected to continue to be at the forefront of the U.S. investment agenda, particularly when it comes to energy development and cooperation. Under President Biden, the U.S. is once again working towards an energy transition. The nation has recommitted to the Paris Agreement and has pledged to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Now, this provides another area of collaboration between the U.S. and Africa via green business. And let's now hear from Louis Yao Aful, the Executive Director of the African Continental Free Trade Area Policy Network in Ghana. He says that Africa's Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is likely to impact future engagements with foreign nations, especially the U.S.
The Biden administration would like to continue that of the Obama administration of engaging Africa. And so the only difference is that now they are going to compete with China over who influences Africa in terms of resources. And so Fortunately for Africa, we now have a single market or a single concessionary free trade area where we are boosting intra-African trade. Therefore, there will not be any agreement outside Africa towards Africa that will not be to the benefit of all party states. It is those parties, it is all those members under the continental free trade who are not yet full members that might maybe, I would say, will be vulnerable to any kind of multilateral agreement that will not be beneficial to the cause of implementing the continental free trade. So yes, Biden's administration would like to focus on how to establish previous trade agreements that were done under the Obama administration. Basically, he would like to continue some of what Trump did. Forget not that the U.S. is focused on interest. And so interest is the key that is going to drive the U.S. I'm saying as of now, they have not yet given a kind of approval. I always say approval. They've not shown interest in terms of really recognizing the continental free trade. And they like to go having multilateral agreements with various countries. But Africa is standing up now. Africa have told the United States and Europe that it is going as a single bloc. And therefore, any existing or new agreement or trade negotiations or agreement with the US will not have to affect that preferential area. So what that means is that if the US want to trade with Kenya, whatever agreement they will have, the concessions, Kenya cannot grant any concession far better than what he has granted to its member states in Africa. The same way if Ghana is going to have any multilateral agreement with the US, he is not going to grant any concessions far better than any he will grant to a member state. However, any agreement that has to do with the products trade in terms of product supply, export, whatever it is, whatever product that is coming into Africa will attract tariff if it's not a member within a preferential treatment.
You're watching Africa Live. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, China's space program launches a key module for the country's first space station. And a Ugandan ICT expert offers free COVID-19 tests to help his country control infections. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
I've been Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. China's space program recorded another milestone, launching a key module this morning for the country's first space station. It marks China's very first steps in building what will become its very own space station over the next year. CGTN's Ning Hong reports.
It's a major breakthrough, with the Tianhe, Chinese for Heaven Harmony, core module brought into Earth orbit. China's space exploration has entered a new era.
I'm very proud to be part of the Tianhe mission. This is a great success for China.
The Tianhe core module is able to support 3 astronauts for 3 to 6 months. Upcoming missions to the module will include a cargo ship bearing supplies and a Shenzhou manned spacecraft, which will bring 3 astronauts up in June this year.
By the end of next year, in-orbit construction will be completed and the space station will begin operations. The designed life of the station in orbit is at least 10 years, but with regular maintenance carried out by astronauts and with regular replacements of equipment, the station's life can be extended for some time.
China is planning to complete the construction of its space station called the Tiangong, or Heaven Palace, with 11 intensive launches in 20 months. This will involve another 2 lab modules and 4 manned missions. The successful launch of the core module of China's space station marks the beginning of the construction of China's space station. It also opens a new era as Chinese astronauts will be routinely going into space. Ning Hong, CGTN, Wenchang.
Now, there is currently one international space station, but China has no access to it, having been barred involvement by the U.S. over what it termed national security issues. Besides this reason, though, why is China building its own space station? CGTN's Wu Lei explains.
Here on Earth, an apple will fall due to gravity's influence, but in outer space, it floats like this. But how might this apple mutate in a microgravity environment? What might happen when an astronaut eats this apple? China has sent 11 astronauts into space since 2003. During their time in space, the astronauts have carried out a variety of experiments, but their time for each visit was limited. China is aiming to remedy this by building a brand new space station by the end of 2022, which is expected to remain in space for over 10 years, allowing astronauts who spend time there to engage in longer physical, biological, and cosmological experiments. As for experiments, Chinese scientists are interested in growing plants. These flowers and vegetables were growing from seeds mutated in space. The effects of living in space are also of concern for scientists. Knowing how to guarantee the ability for astronauts to have a healthy long-term stay in space could pave the way for future space travel. China's new space station won't just be for Chinese scientists, but also for global scientists as well. So far, a total of 9 projects proposed by 17 countries, including Germany, France, and Italy, have been selected for the first round of experiments to be conducted in this new space lab. This new facility is expected to open up a brand new chapter in human space exploration. Wu Lei, CGTN.
Let's go to Mauritius now. The government has issued a disaster alert even as heavy rains subsided on Thursday. Non-essential government workers have been urged to remain indoors. Some families have been evacuated after their homes were flooded. CGTN's Liu Feifei has more.
For now, the rain has nearly stopped, but heavy and persistent rainfall led to a disaster alert issued by the Mauritius government on Wednesday after roads and homes across the country were flooded and vital water sources became polluted. On Wednesday, all non-essential civil servants were asked to stay home from work. Bus and tram services were stopped and scheduled national exams were canceled. The police, firefighters, soldiers, and the National Coast Guards were mobilized to assist those in need. The heavy rains are taking a particularly high toll because the country has experienced persistent rainfall over the past 2 weeks, saturating much of the soil. So that when the torrential downpour started on Tuesday, widespread flooding resulted very quickly. Flooded homes caused some residents to be evacuated, while others worked through the night, pumping out water that sometimes rose above waist high. And although the active clouds that caused torrential rains have moved away from Mauritius and the disaster alert was removed on Wednesday evening, the local meteorological service has warned of more possible torrential rains tonight, and the government has advised all citizens to stay vigilant. Liu Feifei, CGTN, Bellom, Mauritius.
Well, staying with the weather, it appears tropical cyclones are becoming more frequent, more intense and more destructive in southern Africa. That's according to experts who have tracked these weather systems. In recent years, the region has had to contend with tropical cyclones Idai and Eloise, as well as others before them. However, research shows that southern Africa needs to brace for even worse storms in the future. Here's CGTN's Travis Andrews with more.
Tropical cyclones are some of the most destructive weather systems in southern Africa. These storms often cause widespread damage to coastal cities along the Indian Ocean. Flooding has not only wiped out infrastructure in rural areas, but crops as well, which compromises food security. This weather phenomenon, though, is expected to gain in frequency.
What the researchers are showing us and what research has been demonstrating is that what we are seeing is that extreme weather systems are becoming more frequent. So that's bad for us because we're seeing them more frequently. But not only that, to add to that, they are becoming more intense.
While tropical cyclones affect many countries on the South African mainland, Mozambique is particularly at risk. Cyclone Idai in 2019 displaced many of its citizens, some of which were forced to flee to South Africa.
They develop over water, and these waters need to be warm. So therefore, the area that they mainly affect is northern Mozambique, and therefore in that Mozambican channel is quite a nice hotspot for them to develop.
Climate change is said to be playing a role in the frequency of these weather systems, which could impact South Africa greater in the future. Experts say mitigating the devastating effects of tropical cyclones is a challenge, and that the country's northeastern coastline is particularly vulnerable to the phenomenon. And that puts cities such as Durban in a vulnerable position in the future. However, some coastal developments are taking this into account. For now, Southern Africa is exiting one of the peak seasons for tropical cyclones relatively unscathed, but that might not be so in the future. That's Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Let's go to Uganda now, where one man is trying to contain community infections by offering free COVID-19 tests. He uses his van as a mobile laboratory. The ICT engineer has been at the front line in the fight against COVID-19 since Uganda registered its first case in March last year. He first volunteered to disinfect hospitals at the height of the pandemic. And Isabel Nakiria has this report from Kampala.
Nsibira Semu is fighting the community spread of COVID-19 infections. He is volunteering to test people in the suburbs of Kampala who do not have the means to pay for the tests. Nsibira has branded his van with his cost-free COVID-19 campaigns. He uses the van as a laboratory and also helps transport those found positive to hospital.
You can't test them for money. So whenever I collect some money, once or twice a month, I collect what I have, I give back to the community.
Nsibira has been trained as a community health worker and also received online certification from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. He has so far spent about $3,000 of his savings on his campaign. In Uganda, a COVID test goes for about $50, which many can't afford.
Not many people in the communities in Kampala have had a chance to test for COVID-19 because it's costly. Nsibira says his campaign is to have as many people tested for free so that they know their status and get treated in case they are sick.
Over 300 people have benefited from the free tests. He uses the rapid test kit that brings out results in less than 10 minutes.
Too much expensive money they put for. It's too expensive to test for COVID, so we can't afford it. That's why we have never tested.
What he's doing is exceptional. This is improving people's health. I phoned him down the other side and I thought he charges, only to find him here again.
Health experts say Uganda has managed to keep cases relatively low because of strict lockdown measures at the start of the pandemic. But that may not be enough, and the World Health Organization is urging a ramp-up to testing to be able to contain the spread of COVID-19.
Government may not reach everywhere. Government has told them, it's spoken on TV, on radio, everywhere, on all medias you hear. But these people, for some reason, ignore it. So in the process of ignoring it, some of them get the disease and they die. And they would think, their mindset would say, witchcraft. Their mindset would say, maybe my neighbor did this to me, or maybe, so you sensitize them.
Ugandan scientists have developed a rapid test kit and plans are for it to sell at an affordable price, but the homegrown kit has not been approved for commercial use. Meanwhile, Nsibira says he will continue buying test kits and offering as many as he can, free of charge. The task ahead is huge for Nsibira, but he says having a COVID-free community is worth fighting for. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN Kampala, Uganda.
Right, let's now go to Uche for your latest business news.
Thanks, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. The World Bank grants $100 million for emergency recovery in northern Mozambique. And the value of transactions through mobile wallets in Egypt tripled in 2020.
Its effects are surreal, but its existence is undeniable. Mother Nature is fighting back against a species that is destroying it.
We're here to raise our voices. We know that climate change has already started and it's killing us.
It hurts. Amid the tears and the grief, however, there is hope for resolution.
We need to live in harmony with nature.
We focus on the deeds, the deals, and the people working to make a difference. This is Surviving Climate Change, only on CGTN. Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Now, the World Bank has granted $100 million for an emergency recovery project in northern Mozambique. The funds are expected to help resettle and provide social services to hundreds of thousands of people who have been displaced by a jihadist insurgency. The agreement for the funding is part of a 3-year $700 million deal, which was signed by the government and the United Nations Office for Project Services. Now, according to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, at least 2,800 people have been killed in the 3 years of violence.
Security will be our priority in a comprehensive way in order to disarm and defeat the terrorists and violent extremists, with the main goal of returning to normality in affected districts. We are aware that this plan requires bravery, determination, persistency, and the necessary time.
As a start, and at the same time that the Bank Board approved the PRA yesterday, they also approved the Northern Crisis Recovery Project for $100 million, which you just witnessed the signature of. The project will look at providing emergency support to IDPs, those who are displaced, and members of their host communities.
Well, let's head to Egypt now, where the central bank announced that the value of transactions through mobile wallets in 2020 reached about $6.5 billion US. Now, transactions jumped a massive 300% compared to the previous year amid curbs imposed to contain the spread of COVID-19. Well, as CGTN's Yasser Kim now reports, the Apex Bank has added more options to make the facility even more attractive to users.
The mobile wallet service was introduced in 2013 and attracted 12.3 million users in 7 years. But in 2020 alone, the number jumped to 20 million, posting record transactions of $6.5 billion.
There are various uses by Egyptians on these wallets. The most transactions are in transferring money to other wallets, buying products online, paying bills like gas and electricity, and donations to charity.
Curbs imposed to limit the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, including curfews and fear of infection from the disease in 2020, has led more Egyptians to use mobile wallets, pushing the value of transactions up by 300% year on year.
It's excellent. It saves time instead of going to service providers like Vodafone or to banks, especially in these times when you need to social distance. You now have better, faster and easier options to transfer money than before.
The central bank has now added new options for mobile wallet users.
The new services include having savings and loans on the wallet. 1-year credit facility is allowed without having to go to the bank through the mobile phone, and it's also in real time. Loans are allowed for small businesses and the informal sector as well. The user can benefit from the banking tools, such as having savings accounts on the mobile and a new electronic currency, especially for online services.
There are 95 million mobile phone lines in the Egyptian market. With 20 million mobile wallet accounts at the moment, this sector has potential for huge growth in the North African country. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, Tunisia is planning to facilitate the opening of a shipping line for passenger and vehicle transport with neighboring Libya. According to Tunisian authorities, the line will connect Misrata in Libya to the ports of La Goulette and Zarzis initially, and then to the port of Sfax. From Tunis, here's Anin Shaushi with the details.
Tunisian Minister of Transport and Logistics noted that his government will facilitate the implementation of the shipping line. Tunisia views this strategic project as a booster for maritime activity in North Africa.
We are pushing for public-private partnerships to improve the performance of our commercial ports and shipping lines. Tunisia cannot boost exports without efficient ports. The coronavirus crisis hit on maritime links, especially passenger transport. Maritime activity will resume at a normal pace after the pandemic.
The Director General of the Tunisian Export Promotion Center, CPEX, declared that opening a shipping line between Libya's port of Misrata and ports of Sfax and La Goulette will promote the development of Tunisia's exports to neighboring Libya.
Tunisia and Libya will build on previous successful experiences in order to reach economic complementarity. Together, we can boost our economic exchange and trade by building stronger and lasting shipping lines.
Libyan entrepreneurs assert that Libyan and Tunisian business operators are willing to expand trade relations between the two North African states and to promote joint investment projects.
Libya and Tunisia are one country. People need access to free circulation in this geographic area. Both countries have suffered from economic hardships due to coronavirus. The new shipping line will boost trade and the movement of people, vehicles and goods.
The borders between Libya and Tunisia remained closed for months. Now, the reopening and the shipping line will help the tourism, healthcare and export sectors. Libya and Tunisia need the increased flow of people, goods and services.
Tunis and Tripoli will also facilitate travel between the two countries and financial procedures between the Central Bank of Tunisia and the Central Bank of Libya. Tunisia aims to regain the pace of its trade with Libya before 2010, especially with the return to stability in this country. According to the National Institute of Statistics, bilateral trade accounted for almost 7% of Tunisia's total foreign trade in 2010. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now in Uganda, the announcement of the country's first COVID-19 case on March 18th last year led to border closures, curfews and eventually a countrywide lockdown. The restrictions affected the ability of people in the country to earn a living and also paralyzed businesses nationwide. But as Uganda begins to roll out COVID-19 vaccines, the economy is now slowly getting back on its feet. Here's CGTN's Michael Baleke with more.
This was March 2020. Uganda's capital Kampala turned into a ghost town. Schools, churches and businesses closed, and people were locked up at home for 4 months.
COVID-19 affected us as women in the market. First of all, the total lockdown really affected us because we were locked at our homes. We could not move from home to the places of work. All the capital that we had, the small capital we had, was eaten up.
Almost 12 months into the pandemic, the government has eased restrictions on the movement of people, goods and services and allowed some businesses to operate. This is Kampala today. The streets, as you can see,
are bustling with activity. Many shops have opened for trade, but business has not picked up as expected. According to the Bank of Uganda, trade, construction and the services sector took the biggest hit during the pandemic. The pace at which the economy is growing is uneven as restrictions continue to weigh heavily on certain activities like tourism.
The sustenance of the cultural arts has been depending purely on what we get from the guests, 80% of who were foreigners. Now the closing of the airport and all the borders meant that these people no longer come. The closing of the shows have killed all, and I mean all, the revenue.
The latest figures show the economy contracted by 2.2% in the first quarter of financial year 2020-2021 compared to 8.7% in the same period the previous year. But as the country begins to roll out COVID-19 vaccines, the government is looking to sectors like agriculture and tourism to kickstart the economy.
A successful and a faster rollout of the mass vaccination globally could allow a quicker unwinding of social distancing measures and result in more robust increase in economic activity.
The pandemic has forced businesses to become more creative and innovative, according to the World Bank.
We had a lot of engagement online, so we grew our digital presence so that we would continue to engage our clients while we were at home. And as you know, everybody was home, but they were spending a lot of time on their phones.
But for many businesses, their survival remains at great risk, and the government is using monetary policy to support businesses to get loans at lower interest rates in order to keep them afloat. The hope is that as vaccines become readily available and the spread of COVID-19 is contained, the economy is expected to rebound. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And that's all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up later on Global Business Africa, benchmark oil prices continue rising, and that's despite lingering uncertainty about future oil demand. We'll seek some answers on how long is this expected to go. All that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you.
Thanks, Lucia. Well, let's take a short break now. More news as well as sports still to come on Africa Live.
I believe we only need a tool to bring change. And this tool to me, it can be educational background, it can be a skill, it can be a hobby of what you love.
Kibira yenyewe ilikuwa mbaya kitambo, kulikuwa na waizi wengi sana. Na siku hizi yenyewe hata unaweza kaa bila kusikia hata mwizi ameshikwa mahali ama amechomwa ama amefanywa nini. Ndio naona yenyewe Kibira raundime si kama kitambo.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
A launch ceremony was held for a documentary sponsored by China Media Group. The music festival was held in the Chinese city of Chengdu on Thursday. CGTN's Marco was there.
Sichuanese rap, Mongolian folk tunes, a Tibetan duo. In Sichuan's capital, musicians gather to share what bonds them.
Like, you know, music is like a language without frontier, without border. Like, when you hear good music, whenever where it comes from, you feel happy, you want to dance or you want to cry. You feel the emotion without understanding the language.
Rapping is foreign, but my lyrics are Chinese. I compose about Chengdu's history, food, scenery, and people. I'm proud to put all that in my music.
Award-winning folk singer Si Xingge and her band, along with pop duo Anu from southwest China's Tibet, British singer Katie Sky and rap artist Big Brother BBG, along with World Panda Youth reporters from Xiaoman Studio, they have all performed at today's event.
The festival has brought music lovers from near and far, all looking to take in some sounds on an unusually warm day.
I especially love the rapping and the pop songs. The folk songs were also better than I expected.
We had a great time today despite the hot weather. We are fans of the Tibetan duo and we came to support them.
After this launching ceremony, the artists will embark on a 20-day, 6-stop road trip through Sichuan.
There are 56 different ethnic groups living in China. I don't think many people realize how big a treasure that is. I have decided in my career to bring in Mongolian culture to other people and to the world.
The musical caravan will set out soon to share new ideas, folklore, and traditions, while taking in the scenery of southwest China. 百科 CGTN 成都.
And coming up in sports. Different sports stakeholders set for a social media boycott over the weekend.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.